The committee will come to order. The Oversight Committee exists to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. It is our job to work in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. Today, pursuant to that mission statement, the Oversight Committee meets to follow up on our commitment for openness, transparent, and, in fact, compliance with the rule of law. The committee is responsible for protecting the integrity of all of Congress's oversight capability. Citizens and journalists use the Freedom of Information Act, often called FOIA, but that statute allows no access to private emails. And yet, it has become habitual for high-ranking and obviously trickle-down low-ranking individuals to simply, either out of laziness or in order to circumvent later discovery, sometimes by this committee, sometimes by the public, sometimes, quite frankly, by their own bosses, the Federal Records Act, the Presidential Records Act, and the intent of Congress. Although the Federal Records Act and the Presidential Records Act do not apply to all Federal employees, nor should they, nor is it our intention to have it. Communication of official activity is, in fact, a property of the agency in which people work. The computers that you do business on, if you are a Federal employee, or even a contractor acting in a similar role, is, in fact, a government asset. And the government has a right to know, and the government has a responsibility to be able to respond to FOIA of the public and journalists, Congress, but most importantly, the Inspector Generals themselves. The fact is that IG's investigations are inherently less successful if they are denied access to the very material that would show the history and the activity of individuals. Years ago, someone might pull the carbon copy and simply destroy it. At that time, it was an easy and willful act. But today, simply doing it on private email and then routinely deleting, most people don't feel that they are doing anything wrong, but they are. This trend very clearly began, according to our investigation, in the later part of the Bush administration. One of my predecessors, Mr. Waxman, looked deeply into the dual use by the previous administration where individuals, in order to comply with government versus political activity in the White House, used an RNC account completely separated from the official account. Additionally, during that time, they blocked the use of Gmail and Hotmail and so on from the White House. Yet, Mr. Waxman made a point many times in this hearing room that, in fact, there was a question about whether or not this practice was acceptable, honest, or consistent, and he even sent subpoenas for the purpose of receiving the Republican National Committee's documents. I disagreed with him on that because the law clearly said that the White House had a right to do political activities. There were individuals designated who had that right, and there appeared to be an appropriate firewall. That investigation, in my opinion, is not conclusive. But it is a far cry from what began at the moment that Ms. Jackson entered the EPA. The EPA already had a 2008 study, I repeat, a 2008 study in the later years of the Bush administration that showed they did not have the control systems in place to ensure that they were capturing the information. This in no part has nothing to do with who was in the White House. It had to do with the ease and simplicity of using private emails. Most people in America today understand that almost any smartphone can not just do a primary email, but multiple emails, whether it's a BlackBerry, an Android, or an iPhone. All of this technology is the reason we're here today. The individuals that are here today all stand, at least a portion of them, as individuals who have not complied with the Federal Records Act, who have clearly circumvented that. We are not here to indict individuals, though. Our witnesses today are here because we want to show a pervasive problem that began at the dawn or the sunset of the Bush administration or the dawn of the Obama administration. But it has not been corrected, in fact, has proliferated. This committee has an absolute responsibility to either change the behavior or change the law or both. It is our commitment to do that. It is the commitment of this President, orally and in writing, to be the most transparent in history. Transparency requires two things. One, that you let the sun shine in, and secondly, that the information be available in the sunlight. The fact is, when private emails are used and often deleted, they eliminate the ability, even when the sun shines in, to provide it. We will hear today that all emails have been accounted for from many individuals. I have to tell you, it simply isn't true. What has happened is all emails that can be found through ordinary efforts have been found. But very clearly, emails have been lost. During the last two administrations ago, again under Mr. Waxman, we insisted in this committee that the White House spend tens of millions of dollars to replicate official emails that were lost during the conversion from Lotus Notes to Microsoft Office. Millions and millions of dollars simply to gather a few emails and make sure none were lost for future generations. To me, that says it has been important to this committee, no matter who is in the chair, and that is not going to change. Particularly important to us is that, in fact, education within the Federal workforce is not sufficient, and I think Mr. Cummings will join me in this, from the time that we sat in this dais together, he and myself, we have heard the same excuse from one part of government after another, and that is, it is too difficult to get into my official system. This committee also has primary responsibility for cybersecurity. Let me assure you of one thing. We cannot have greater security of Federal records if, in fact, Gmail, Hotmail, or a host of other sites are, in fact, not even under Federal control and have important information. To that end, I have offered legislation, and I believe that this committee will, in fact, see that in this Congress, legislation in support of the President and the Administration's effort to make real and lasting change will be will be enacted. The committee, again, has examined violations of this Federal transparency under both Republican and Democratic administrations. It is the new Internet, the smartphone, and the ease of these activities that has ultimately made it this pervasive. I hope that we will continue to see that H.R. 1233 and 1234 become law, but it will only be a combination of that and sincere effort by the Administration, by agencies large and small, to capture information and to ensure that quote, complexity or difficulty of getting into official emails is no longer an excuse heard by this committee or any other committee of Congress. And certainly, I want to say for the members of the press who will be listening and seeing this, our greatest effort is to ensure that their FOIAs are, in fact, a complete search of the Federal record. And with that, I want to thank my ranking member for being a partner in this effort, and I will yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everyone. And Mr. Chairman, I thank you for holding this hearing this morning. One of the things that I'm hoping that each witness will do, as I listen to the Chairman's statement, I'm always very careful about people's reputations. This is very important to me. We have one life to live. this is no dress rehearsal and this is that life. And so I want to make sure that if you did not intend to circumvent the records and transparency laws, I would appreciate it if you would tell us that when you testify, because I don't want that to be out there if it's not accurate. Although some may suggest that the committee's focus on Federal employees using personal email accounts seems trivial, especially in light of the grave national security questions Congress is currently facing, I believe government transparency is a significant matter that potentially affects every policy we implement, and that I agree with the Chairman. For this reason, I support responsible efforts to ensure that our government is operating in a transparent manner, and I have advocated strongly for this committee to exercise its jurisdiction to conduct robust oversight aimed at improving transparency. Over the past 5 years, our nation has made great strides towards these goals, and we should acknowledge those improvements. Any suggestion that the Obama administration is somehow less transparent or less compliant with Federal records laws than the previous administration fails to recognize reality. During the Bush administration, as the Chairman has stated, the White House, he didn't state this, but let me tell you for your information, during the Bush administration, the White House lost hundreds of days of official emails, and top officials routinely used their Republican National Committee email accounts for official business. An investigation by this committee revealed that of 88 officials who used RNC email accounts for official business, no emails were preserved for 51 of them. I would like to enter into the record an article from the Associated Press dated 2007, which said this, and I quote, "The White House said Wednesday it had mishandled Republican Party-sponsored email accounts used by nearly 2 dozen presidential aides, resulting in the loss of an undetermined number of emails concerning official White House business." I ask that that article be admitted.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Those emails involved the U.S. Attorney firings, the Jack Abramoff scandal, and a host of other matters, and they were lost not for a day, not but for a year, but forever. These systemic deficiencies prevented Congress and the American people from fully understanding how their government was operating at the highest levels. In contrast, President Obama has taken significant steps to improve records management. The White House email system now automatically preserves all emails from White House accounts. On November 28, 2011, President Obama became the first president since Truman to issue a directive to agencies on managing Federal records. As we will hear today, the President instructed the archivist and the Director of OMB to craft a 21st century framework to improve agency performance and begin managing email records in an electronic format by 2016. So is the Obama administration more transparent than its predecessor? In my opinion, absolutely. Can we do more to increase transparency and compliance with Federal records laws? Absolutely. And we must. I hope today's hearing focuses on how we can do that. Today we will hear from 4 witnesses who use personal email accounts to conduct official business. To be clear, no Federal law prohibits the use of personal email for official business so long as those emails are properly preserved. Very important. In this case, it appears that the majority of the emails at issue were in fact properly preserved because employees copied them to their official accounts to ensure that agency servers archive them. In cases in which this did not happen, it appears that employees have gone back to recover emails in order to ensure that they are fully available for review. Clearly, we can always do better in terms of ensuring that Federal employees know the rules and comply with them. To this end, I introduced H.R. 1234, the Electronic Message Preservation Act, in order to modernize the Federal Records Act and the Presidential Records Act for the electronic age. Mr. Chairman, an amendment you added during our committee markup is directly on point for this hearing, and I applaud you for that. It would ensure that email records created using non-official accounts are preserved and accessible through agency record-keeping systems by requiring employees to forward email records to their official accounts within 5 days. But my bill has language since it passed out of this committee back in March. Mr. Chairman, I hope that you will join me in urging the House leadership to bring my bill to the House floor as soon as possible. Finally, I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. Each of you has served or is serving this country in a critical government position. Several of you rearranged your schedules to be here, some even under the threat of subpoena. Of course, the committee deserves answers to our questions, but you also deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. I want you to know that we appreciate your service and your cooperation. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. All members will have 7 days in which to submit opening statements and other extraneous material for the record. Before I introduce my witnesses, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate Minority Report, EPA's FOIA and Federal Records Failures Uncovered, dated September 9, 2013, be entered in the record and copies be made and distributed so that all members and witnesses would have the report. Without objection, so ordered. We now welcome our distinguished panel of witnesses. Mr. Gary Gensler is Chairman of the important, although numerically sometimes considered small, U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Ms. Lisa Jackson is the former administrator of the EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency, and currently is the Vice President of Environmental Initiatives for Apple Corporation, Inc. Mr. Jonathan Silver is the former Executive Director of the Loan Program Office at the U.S. Department of Energy. Mr. Silver is now a visiting distinguished senior fellow for Third Way. Welcome. Mr. Andrew McClaflin is the former Deputy Chief Technology Officer, Executive Office of the President. Mr. McClaflin is currently the Senior Vice President of BetaWorks and Chief Executive Officer of DIGS and Instapaper. Very impressive. There is life after government. And the Honorable David Ferriero is the Archivist of the United States and the man we count on to work hand in hand with all the agencies to modernize and capture this information. Pursuant to the committee rules, I'd ask that all witnesses please rise and take the oath before testifying. And raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative, and please be seated. You're a large panel today. You're all skilled professionals, so suffice to say your entire opening statement will be placed in the record, but we'd like you to come as close to or less than the 5 minutes to leave plenty of time for questioning. And with that, we recognize Mr. Gensler.
Good morning, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, members of this committee. Promoting transparency in government is critical so that the public can have a clear window and participate in government decision-making. The Federal Records Act and the related FOIA are key to such transparency. I thank this committee for this hearing and the work on these matters, bringing it into sharper focus. I joined the Commodity Futures Trading Commission in May of 2009 in the wake of the worst financial crisis in 80 years. 8 million Americans lost their jobs. And the remarkably dedicated CFTC staff have worked around the clock to bring much-needed reforms to the swaps market, which was at the center of the crisis. We also took numerous steps since then to bring transparency to our work. We voluntarily post external meeting notes, who's there, what they've handed us on our website, over 2,200 meetings. We've increased tenfold our public meetings, and we've held nearly 24 roundtables to facilitate public interaction. Literally, we rolled up our sleeves and worked day and night. Though I used my official email account far more than my personal To get the job done, I did routinely engage with CFTC staff and others through my personal email, particularly outside of normal business hours. Having come to this job after years of not working in a traditional office setting and primarily being a single stay-at-home dad, frankly, I was not attuned to the ways of accessing work email at home. And at the CFTC, we did not have a robust training program, and I personally didn't receive training on either remote access or Federal records. As head of the agency, I take full responsibility with regard to records management, training, and promoting transparency at the CFTC. And I want to thank the agency's Inspector General who highlighted this that it's better to avoid using personal email, even though no law prohibited it. The IG said that I used official email far more frequently than my personal, as he counted approximately 10 times more official emails than personal. He also said that there was no indication that the Chairman was attempting to hide the use of the personal email from CFTC employees in an attempt to conduct secret official business. In fact, many of the emails were with the General Counsel and the Chief Information Officer and the Executive Director. In a subsequent letter to Congress, he said, "We do not believe it violated any Federal law." When this committee sought the emails from my personal account, I immediately tasked staff with gathering and delivering all responsive documents, and we did provide approximately 11,000 emails that were sent to or originated or copied to personal email. Approximately 99% were exchanged with another government official and were on Federal systems, and in fact 97% were at the CFTC already. The remaining documents that were not already there are there now, and I've tasked that staff look at them to make sure they're filed appropriately. But moving forward, let me say, I believe we can and need to do better. First, I've directed staff to revise the CFTC's email policies, working along with Archivist Ferriero and his staff, and I'm glad he's agreed in meetings with me that he'll help us revise our CFTC policies, ensuring a stricter and tighter guidance. Second, I've directed our Executive Director and General Counsel to significantly enhance the agency's training on Federal records and related how to access emails and do it in an efficient way. We have to promote telework and a flexible work schedule. And third, while we've already made significant changes in technology, I've directed staff to ensure that we have flexible and efficient tools not only for access, but importantly record keeping, and that's why I applaud the Archivist's efforts to bring Capstone into reality. This is a system where all the emails of senior officials will be captured. Ensuring full compliance with the Federal Records Act and other transparency laws is critical to the public's faith in and understanding of our government, and particularly of the CFTC. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Could you?
Oh, sorry. Good morning, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. I appreciate having a chance to offer my statement to the committee this morning. Serving as Administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency was a great privilege and the high point of my 25-year career in public service. I joined the EPA shortly after graduate school after earning a master's degree in chemical engineering. I spent 15 years on the staff at EPA, at headquarters here in Washington, and later in the field office in New York before joining the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection in 2002. I believe my public service ethic came from my father, a Navy vet, mailman, and then a machinist for the U.S. Postal Service. In January 2009, like EPA administrators before me, I was assigned 2 email addresses at epa.gov. One address was to be published on the EPA website, and the inbox was managed by EPA staff. The second address was shared with a more limited number of people, and the inbox was managed primarily by me. As you know firsthand, public officials get a lot of email. The EPA has estimated that the administrator receives well over 1 million emails every year. That's a new email message almost every 30 seconds, around the clock, 365 days a year. Managing an inbox that big is more than one person can handle and do their job effectively, to say the least. That's why many members of Congress, as well as the executive branch, set up a second account. It's about time management and efficiency. I'd like to address the naming of my second account. I suggested that we label the second account Admin Jackson or something similar with my name or title in it. But career staffers recommended using a full name since the email address database was publicly available and searchable. People looking to have unimpeded access or a faster way to reach the administrator would be searching for a secondary address, so I was advised against anything obvious. My husband and sons were still living in East Windsor, New Jersey, and our family dog's name is Ricky. So with tongue-in-cheek, I named my account windsor.richard@epa.gov. Regardless of the choice of name, the account was for official business and subject to the Freedom of Information Act. There was a learning curve for me on who should have access to the second account. I eventually decided that the account should be primarily for my senior staff and White House staff. EPA has released thousands of emails from this account. I used it every day to do my job more effectively. I'd like to address personal email. When I was confirmed as administrator, like most people, I had a personal email account. We public officials are, after all, also private citizens. I maintained a personal email account for personal matters. Every public official has to use her best judgment in ensuring appropriate use of personal emails. My practice was to forward any email that I deemed pertaining to government business into an official EPA.gov email account so that it could be captured for record-keeping purposes. I respectfully call the committee's attention to an example of this practice. On February 8, 2009, I forwarded an email from my home email account to an official EPA email account. The business value of the email was questionable, but out of an abundance of caution, I forwarded it to a staffer as an FYI with a note to ensure that it was not given undue weight in the policymaking process. This email chain can be found on EPA's website, and I would like to hear submitted for the record, Mr. Chairman. This email, it was released as part of a Freedom of Information Act request, and I offer it as evidence that my action captured the email for transparency and record-keeping purposes. I've come to accept that there are those who will second-guess the judgments that I made or question the motives behind those judgments. On one hand, there can certainly be honest and reasoned debate over my judgments, and on the other, there are some who want to theorize that there is a hidden agenda. The principal reason I come here today is to make it perfectly clear that it was my practice to ensure that any official business conducted by me or through my email accounts was appropriately captured for record-keeping purposes. Mr. Cummings, to answer your questions, I certainly did not intend to circumvent records or transparency laws, and to the contrary, I intended for my records to be captured for purposes of record-keeping. I recognize that the issue of preserving official government correspondence is of critical importance, and in the digital age, these issues are difficult ones. I commend you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee for tackling them. In a world that has been transformed by our ever-increasing ability to connect, it is my hope that you can find a path forward that encourages transparency without unduly restricting job efficiency, personal convenience, and privacy. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Silver.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Congressman Cummings. Thank you for having me today. My name is Jonathan Silver, and I've been asked to appear today as the committee examines issues around email record-keeping in the Federal Government. I previously served as the Executive Director of the Loan Programs Office at the Department of Energy, a position I left almost 2 years ago. I should note, therefore, that I am here today in my capacity as a private citizen and am not in a position to speak to or about the current retention policies and practices at the Department. I testified before this committee's Subcommittee on Regulatory Affairs, Stimulus Oversight, and Government Spending in 2012, where these issues were discussed in depth. In 2011, I testified in front of a different House committee that also addressed some of these issues. I have also been interviewed on several occasions by various committee staff. I last came before this committee more than a year ago during the committee's review of one of the 1705 program loans. During the course of that review, I voluntarily provided all of the relevant documents I had from my personal email account, covering not only the time I was at the Department of Energy, but also, at the committee's request, emails for an entire year before I was even in the Federal Government. Today, I will, of course, answer the committee's questions again to the best of my ability. My appearance today, along with my swift compliance with your document requests a year and a half ago, demonstrates, I think, my willingness to assist the committee in its work. I would note, Mr. Chairman, that I also offered to make myself available to committee staff in an informal setting prior to this hearing. As you know, Mr. Chairman, the 1705 loan program had a statutory sunset date of September 30, 2011, and substantial funds needed to be deployed by that date. It is important to remember that my office was working diligently to deploy that capital within a time frame established by Congress. We worked day and night to get the job done. Working under such a tight deadline required ongoing communications during and after business hours and at night and on weekends. This was challenging because, as anyone who has worked at the Department can tell you, the government's IT systems are old and cumbersome. The overwhelming majority of the emails produced from my personal account are copies of emails from my DOE account containing documents, duplicate copies, white papers, analyses, spreadsheets, and others that already existed on the DOE servers. I occasionally forwarded or had forwarded to me documents from work in order to be able to work while traveling out of the office or at night and on weekends. I also sent and received some emails asking about logistics or for updates or to share an observation. I used my personal email in an effort to be as efficient and productive as possible, not in an attempt to be evasive. In 2009, when I joined the Department, I do not recall being provided training in what was or was not a Federal Records Act issue. And to respond directly to you, Congressman Cummings, at no time did I intend to try to circumvent the Federal Records Act. While I strongly support transparency in the Federal Government, when I left the government 2 years ago, I did not have a clear understanding of the Department's requirements concerning personal email retention. As soon as I was apprised of these obligations, I immediately turned over all the relevant documents I had, both to the Department of Energy and directly to this committee. It is my understanding that that production has satisfied any obligation I may have had under the Federal Records Act. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Do you want to answer Mr. Cummings' question as Ms. Jackson did?
I thought I did, sir. But if I didn't, let me say again that I directly respond to Congressman Cummings' question by saying that I had at no time any intent to circumvent the Federal Records Act.
Thank you. Mr. McClaflin.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, members of the committee. I actually think this is an incredibly interesting set of issues. And so what I'd like to do is make an observation and then 3 suggestions for the committee's consideration as you move legislation forward to the full House. My observation is simply this. The world that we're moving into is one where any new executive branch employee is not only going to have a single private personal email account, but may well have dozens of communications accounts on different services. I've listed probably 2 dozen common services that I would expect any 20-something to have in my written testimony. And so the world that we're moving into is one where friends, contacts, former coworkers, members of the public can find you on those services and can send communications in. So I have one personal example that I think is also relevant. I think I'm sort of sitting here at the table as an example of an ordinary, somewhat reasonably conscientious employee who got a whole bunch of communications into my personal accounts, forwarded the bulk of them over to my official accounts, but missed some. And when I got a FOIA request, went back, found them, forwarded them in, and that was my experience. But the world that we're living in now is one where the Federal agencies will not even have official accounts on these communication services. There's literally no way to send them in. So I have 3 suggestions for the committee's consideration. The first one is the committee might want to specify that if a communication can't easily be forwarded into an official account, there should be some kind of safe harbor practice that would count as a transmission into the Federal Government. For example, capturing a screenshot of an image. Now, I have to say some communications tools that are very common among 20-somethings these days, like Snapchat, are built in such a way as to make it almost impossible to grab a screenshot and to forward that communication in. But you could imagine a safe harbor approach where you could take a screenshot, pass that along to your email account, and have that be a safe harbor for compliance with the Federal Records Act, the Presidential Records Act. Number 2, and I should say H.R. 1233 does a very nice job of clearing up 2 problems. One is knowing where you have to send a communication in order for it to count as having been transmitted, in other words, into your official account. And the second part is that it says that it must be done within 5 days. As you know, there's currently no time limit on when a record has to be transmitted over in order to be compliant with the law. I think those are 2 positive changes. So idea number 2 is it's very difficult right now for a member of the public to find a way to officially communicate with an employee. For all the usual obvious reasons of spam, of privacy, of security, we don't publish every Federal employee's official email address. It can often be very difficult to find. One thing that is very common now in customer service operations, or if you look at, for example, a lot of newspaper websites that want their journalists to be accessible but don't want them to be targets for constant spam, is that they use things like a web form where you can submit a request to be in contact with that individual, and it gets routed to that individual, and they can then respond. But it's a reasonably workable hack that allows people to reach you, and so that they don't feel like they have to go and communicate with you on some known personal account, because that's the only one that they have access to. Suggestion number 3 is the committee could urge agencies or even require agencies to come up with language that must be attached, where possible, to the personal accounts of employees. So, for example, on a Tumblr account, you have a profile, and you could imagine a sentence being required to be inserted that says, if you want to talk to me about official business, don't talk to me here, don't send me a message here, send it to my email address. This would be easier to do on some of the bigger services like Facebook, LinkedIn, Tumblr, Twitter that have public-facing profiles. Other services would make it much more difficult. But you could imagine that the agencies would have to at least specify some basic language for some of the most popular communications platforms and try to route official communications elsewhere. Let me just say one final note, which is just by way of example. One of the things that happens over and over again is that people just communicate with you on your personal accounts. Sometimes you may not even read it if you go on vacation and you don't go back through your personal emails. One of the things that happened to me was a long experience involving Haiti, where the only way to communicate with individuals on the ground that were running ISPs that I happened to know that needed fuel was to use Skype. And Skype was a tool that the White House had not approved, but it was the only way to reach these people in Port-au-Prince that were keeping the servers running. And so we used it, we captured screenshots, we transferred it all over, but it's a great example of where the most effective tool to get government business done may not even be an official tool. And the urgency exception applies, but there is no standard ordinary practice for how to forward those communications into records, and that's something that I think any responsible agency ought to address. I'll be happy to answer the committee's questions. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ferriero, they have certainly teed up the fact that nobody knows how to deal with the new ones, and your job is impossible. Take as long as you want to respond.
Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, Member Gowdy.
I think your mic maybe need to be closer.
Thanks for holding this hearing on the importance of Federal record keeping and the challenges we all face in managing the vast and growing number of email records. As background and context on our latest work in this area, on November 28, 2011, the President issued a Memorandum on Managing Government Records, which launched a multi-year executive branch-wide effort to reform and modernize records management policies and practices. In the memorandum, the President stated, when records are well managed, agencies can use them to assess the impact of programs, to reduce redundant efforts, to save money, and to share knowledge within and across their organizations. In these ways, proper records management is the backbone of open government. At the President's direction, I joined with the Acting Director of OMB to issue an implementation directive to all heads of executive departments and agencies and independent agencies, largely based in part on the work done by this committee in H.R. 1233 and 1234. The directive describes two high-level goals and a series of actions that NARA, OMB, and the departments and agencies of the Federal Government must take to modernize records management policies and practices. The two high-level goals are, first, require electronic record keeping to ensure transparency, efficiency, and accountability, and secondly, demonstrate compliance with the Federal records management statutes and regulations. I am pleased to say that we are making progress toward achieving these goals. For example, in response to the directive, each agency designated a senior official to oversee and ensure compliance with records management statutes and regulations, not the records manager, a senior agency official with that responsibility. And last month, NARA issued guidance to assist agencies in meeting the directive's call to manage email records in an electronic format by the end of 2016. Among the additional activities underway as a result of the directive, the Office of Personnel Management is working with NARA to establish a formal records management occupational series. There is no such thing as a records manager in the Federal occupational series. And by the end of 2014, agency records officers must obtain the NARA Certificate of Federal Records Management and Training, and all Federal agencies must establish a method to inform all employees of their records management responsibilities and develop records management training for appropriate staff. I believe that the Presidential Memorandum and the implementing directive have set us on the path to addressing the challenges in modernizing and reforming records management. The effective management of email records is a significant part of records management reform. In that regard, the Committee's concern over the use of private or unofficial email accounts used to conduct Federal business is also a topic of interest to the National Archives. The National Archives discourages the use of private email accounts to conduct Federal business, but understands that there are situations where such use does occur. Accordingly, where a private email account must be used to conduct government business because, for example, the government-provided email service is not available for technical reasons, the Federal records generated through these private accounts must be moved to the official record-keeping system of the agency as soon as practicable, and then managed according to the Federal Records Act, the Freedom of Information Act, and other legal requirements and their implementing regulations. As I just noted, NARA recently released an agency-wide bulletin introducing a new approach to managing the billions of email messages that are sent or received in Federal agencies. We have also issued a bulletin reminding agency heads about the need to appropriately manage and protect Federal records. Both of these bulletins and the President's directive are attached to my written statement. There are a number of challenges and opportunities related to the use of electronic records in the Federal Government. The technological landscape is constantly changing and the volume of records is always growing. The focus of today's hearing is email and the agencies covered by the Federal Records Act, but the challenges involved with records generated from social media platforms, as you have just heard, and other two branches of the Federal Government are every bit as difficult. The talented staff of the National Archives and Records Administration looks forward to working through these issues. The long-term success of the National Archives and the historical record of our nation depends on our collective success. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Before I begin my questioning, could I have that email? The one. I apologize, but this is sort of committee business that I didn't expect to have. Mr. Silver, you are represented by Dixine Shapiro Morin.
Yes, sir.
In your opening statement, you said you wanted to be transparent. I haven't put it up on the screen. I have in my possession a disturbing email that comes from an individual apparently working at Dixine Shapiro that actually asks a member of this committee not to ask questions of you. Are you familiar with this? Did you consult with your counsel?
I'm sorry, Congressman. I'm not at all familiar with what you're with that, and I'm told that we will look into it.
Well, I want more than look into it. I want an explanation from your counsel on why we shouldn't refer this to the American Bar Association. I'm informed that this is an employee who is in the lobby side of Dixine Shapiro, who made multiple contacts to committee members, and at least one of them to committee staff, specifically or to staff representing a member, specifically asked them not to ask you questions. We're providing your counsel with it, but from a committee standpoint, and you're not the attorney, I'm speaking quite frankly, that's why it's not my question to you. The question of whether we refer this to the Bar Association, whether in fact it's an interference with Congress, which I find it to be, and the like, will need to be resolved with the ranking member and myself after this hearing. But we have had a long history. Dixine Shapiro Morin has represented a lot of individuals here. This one crosses the line, and I wanted to make sure it was on the record, not on behalf of Mr. Silver, but on the fact that when represented by counsel, we expect you to know more than the witness and keep the witness out of this embarrassing situation. Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for sharing this email with me. As a lawyer and as an officer of the court, this concerns me greatly. Having represented lawyers in Maryland in disciplinary matters, you're absolutely right to be questioning this. I hope that this is not what it appears to be, because I think it would be very, very unfortunate. And you're absolutely right. It would be clearly out of bounds. I hope it's not what it appears to be. Thank you very much, and I will join you in your efforts to look into it.
Thank you. Now we'll go to the line of questioning. Mr. Silver, this question had nothing to do with your conduct. I simply had to get it into the record. I'm going to start, Mr. Gensler. The CFTC.com, who owns it?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not familiar with any website, CFTC.com.
Well, it's not a website. It's an email address that, in addition to the U.S. and .gov, it's a commercial site. And I guess we're trying to find out whether, in fact, because we have emails delivered in preparation from on this, whether or not that is a CFTC asset, and if so, if it's being captured.
I'm not familiar with any web address that's CFTC.com. This was a question that was raised by your hardworking staff late yesterday, and I know our technology staff is taking a look at what this might be, but I'm not familiar with any such site. It's not one I've ever used, sir.
But you have used it. That's part of the discovery is you may not have intended to use it, but we have emails now that say they're coming from you at a .com.
What our senior technologist told me last night, and I think he'll have to work with you to look at it, is that it may be that somebody put in a name, not an actual address, but a name, just as they might misspell my name instead of Gary with one R with two R's.
Well, again, we'll look into it. It's a little, again, it's part of that whole question. Mr. Gensler, just to put it in the record, you headed an important organization, some 600 people, and tremendous amount of dollars that passed through. Did you receive any training as to the Federal Records Act?
I'm the head of the agency, and I take full responsibility, but no, I did not receive training on the Federal Records Act as I came into the agency. I've spent a lot of time on training these last 3 or 4 months.
Ms. Jackson, you've spent a lifetime since graduate school. Have you received training on the Federal Records Act?
I did receive record retention training, as I recall, sir. EPA would have those records, though they're not in my possession.
Mr. Silver, how about yourself?
To the best of my recollection, Congressman, I did not receive specific training on the Federal Records Act.
Mr. McClaflin, if people don't get trained, is there any way that all those ideas and suggestions mean anything?
No, sir.
Okay, particularly agency heads. Mr. Silver, you made some very specific statements, and I want to call you on one of them because they don't seem to square. I have an email between you and Morgan Wright, dated August 21st, 2011, and it says, and I quote, "Don't ever send an email on DOE email with private email address. That makes them subpoenable." Tell me why I shouldn't consider that a deliberate circumvention, since you were pervasive in using, setting up and creating and even putting other people onto non-government email, and you conducted business even while you were at the office from these non-government emails? Why is it I should not consider that a deliberate circumvention?
Congressman, I did certainly use my private email from time to time, but as I said before and want to reiterate now, it was certainly never my intent to evade. The email that you referred to is a response to an email chain that precedes it that is on the DOE servers, and somebody noted that there was a personal email address in the header to somebody. And mine was an admonishment and a reminder that you should not mix these two things.
Is it coincidental that when we looked for emails related to the need to backfill money for one of the largest bankruptcies related to the to the energy loans, that those the emails related to that, the emails related to pumping in money at the end to try to stop or delay a fall were on private emails and that were not forwarded?
I'm sorry. The question is, do those exist?
Well, they did exist.
Yes.
Mr. Gensler, you went through the 99% and the forwarding and so on. Mr. Silver, you didn't. You very clearly, from what my records show and my memory for that matter, you created a separate account. You used it to talk to people about problems in the loan program and about ultimately how to hide or delay the knowledge of an impending bankruptcy at Solyndra, right?
Well, Congressman, I was communicating with longstanding confidence, people who I had worked with for many, many years. Some who wrote to me because they had my personal email on it. I responded in kind. I did send some of those emails. It was not my intention to evade anything there, but we were in the heat of trying to struggle with this company, and we wrote some personal emails. Yes, we did.
Okay. Well, we'll put some more of them in the record later, but I just have one last one. Ms. Jackson, who is Allison Taylor?
Allison Taylor is a friend. She's someone I've known for quite some time.
But you work for the President, right?
When I worked at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, I worked for the President.
Okay. So you're working for the President. The President has a prohibition on basically your coordination with lobbyists. She's a lobbyist, isn't she?
I believe she is a registered lobbyist, sir. I don't
Okay.
know if she is today, but
Well, my understanding is, Allison Taylor at Siemens.com, do you know what she did for Siemens?
I believe she ran the sustainability business or the government affairs. I'm not sure. The way I knew her was actually in a personal manner as well.
So you only knew her in a personal manner?
No, that's not fair to say. I mean, I can't separate knowing someone in this city. They have jobs. People have jobs and lives. But I first—
Well, I apologize, but that was what the Abernoff scandal was about, is that people said we were friends when, in fact, he was a lobbyist. From your Richard Windsor, and I want to get on to the ranking member account, the official private account, the one the public didn't have, in 2009, you did an email that has a P.S. P.S., can you use my home email account rather than the one when you need to contact me directly, TX Lisa? To me, that sounds like, you didn't want the efficiency of not being bothered. Just the opposite. You were giving a lobbyist your personal email account for other communication when she wanted to reach you directly.
Sir, again, if you look at the entire email chain, you can see that there's a couple things going on. She makes note that she has requested an official meeting through official channels, through my chief of staff. And she goes on, it's a chatty email, and she says, there's no business to be done. And so what I was doing was telling a personal friend, someone I knew personally, hey, if you want to contact me, don't use my official account that I'm using to get business done day in and day out. You've already made a request for a meeting. Contact me at home. Now, certainly, if anything in that email when she contacted me at home was business related, then I would my practice would be to send that into the official account, as the example I demonstrated.
Okay. Well, we'll put the entire chain in the record, and I'm sure others will use it, and I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mr. Jackson, just a real quick question, just kind of following up on what the Chairman was just asking about. You said Allison Taylor was a friend, and you did. I mean, can you explain that relationship so we'll have some clarification there?
Certainly. It was a pre-existing relationship. It existed before I was confirmed as administrator of the agency. I knew her. She had worked for many years. I first met her on the Hill, I believe, working for Mr. Dingell in Energy and Commerce. She's someone in environmental circles that is thought of extraordinarily highly, and we have many mutual friends as well. If you look at the email in question, it's Lisa and Allison. It's an email that had a business component, but that's why I felt as though there was a personal component.
Now, just was there any effort to evade the records and transparency laws here?
No, sir. In fact, it's a public record that I'm saying to her, feel free to use my personal account, but it was not to evade or circumvent records or transparency.
Mr. Ferriero, Ferriero, is that close enough? All right.
Rhymes with stereo.
You know who I'm talking to. Is there anything in the Federal Records Act or any other law that you know of that prohibits the use of a secondary official account or the so-called alias email account?
No, there is not.
In fact, the NRA, the NARA issued guidance for agencies yesterday. Is that right?
That's right.
In part addressed alias email accounts where an official uses an email address with a pseudonym. NARA's guidance say, and I quote, NARA recognizes that employees may have a business need for more than one agency-administered email account, end of quote. One of the business needs NARA identifies as, and I quote, using separate accounts for public and internal correspondence. Now, can you describe NARA's position on how agencies should treat secondary accounts?
Let me just clarify. Yesterday's bulletin clarifies our stand on the need to ensure that multiple email accounts are accounted for. NARA guidance before that always said, regardless of medium that you're using, you need to capture Federal records. So this one clarifies the electronic mail situation. I think the situation that EPA described in terms of 1 million email messages coming in a day to an address is a good example of the need for multiple addresses. And as far as NARA is concerned, we don't care how many addresses you have as long as those that are doing Federal business are captured in a Federal system so that they're available for future use.
Now, coming back to you, Ms. Jackson, there seems to be quite a bit of concern about your use of an alias email account to conduct official business. You said that you use the alias Richard Windsor in addition to a standard EPA email address bearing your first and last name. You explained that. In a letter to Science Committee Chairman Ralph Hall, the EPA explained the need for this alias email as follows, and I want to quote, find out whether you agree with this. It says the secondary account is an everyday working email account of the administrator to communicate with staff and other government officials. This secondary email account is used for practical purposes. Given the large volume of emails sent to the public account, more than 1.5 million in fiscal year 2012, for instance, the secondary email account is necessary for effective management and communication between the administrator and colleagues. Is this an accurate explanation of your reason for using a secondary email account? I thought you said 1 million. They're saying 1.5, but
I estimated low. Yeah, I believe that EPA has used the 1.5. I took a conservative number. And yes, it's generally the same as the explanation I gave, which is It is not unusual in the public account for thousands of emails to come in overnight commenting on a rule or a concern. Write the EPA administrator and tell him or her this or that. And so for practical purposes, for time management purposes, for the ability to do the job using email, that's why I had a secondary official email account.
And who did you communicate with using Richard Windsor email, that address?
In general, I used it to communicate with my senior staff at the Environmental Protection Agency, with White House staff, with some members of the administration, but they were senior members of the administration. I limited the use of it over time because I couldn't have too many people using it, or it would defeat the purpose of having a secondary official.
Now, do you know whether this was a new practice of the EPA? This practice that you just talked about?
No, sir. My predecessors before me had secondary official email accounts.
In fact, many of your predecessors in Democratic and Republican administrations alike employed email aliases to conduct official business. Among others, President George W. Bush, first EPA Administrator Christine Todd Whitman, used the address, quote, "to wit," end of quote. Marcus Peacock, who was an acting administrator under President Bush, used the address, quote, "tofu," end of quote. Ms. Jackson, were the records in your primary and secondary email accounts preserved as required by the Federal Records Act?
But both of those accounts are preserved and archived. They are in the possession of EPA, their custody, their control. They are official accounts, and that's why they were set up that way.
Now, as far as you know, were the records in both your primary and secondary email accounts searched when necessary in response to the Freedom of Information Act request?
As far as I know, that's exactly what happened, and I certainly know that there were times when I would be asked, do you think there are records in your accounts responsive? And I would say, go ahead and search them. They were searchable. Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Gensler, I want to come back to you. Chairman rightfully had asked, I think it was Mr. Silver, whether he had answered my question. Did you answer that question? Maybe I missed it. The one about transparency, whether you intentionally.
I thank you for bringing me back to that. Just as the Inspector General of our agency said, I think I quoted that I hadn't violated any Federal records law. It's also to your question, I did not intend to circumvent Federal Records Act.
Okay. And I understand that you've employed several different aliases during your tenure. Why did you decide to use email aliases?
Though at the CFTC we don't have quite the volume that is over at the EPA, as I came into the office, there were many concerned citizens, sometimes hundreds in a day, that would email into gensler@cftc.gov. Everyone at the CFTC has that same nomenclature. And so the Office of Data Technology, along with the Executive Director and the lawyers, set up another account that was just, it just took my initials actually, but set up another account which was linked. The FOIA office had it linked. We've gone back just in preparation for this hearing to see whether over these last years, whether they were always linked. And it was the senior staff of the agency and of government could communicate on this secondary account, which, as I say, were linked in the FOIA office and the data technology and is archived.
My last question to you, Ms. Jackson, and to you, Mr. Gensler. I mean, I'm sure having had to come before this committee, you've thought about this a lot. And I'm just wondering, are there things that you think the Congress ought to be doing or your agencies could be doing as to make sure I'm sure you agree with what we're trying to get to here, things that we might be able to do so that future folk in your positions are, are within bounds of what we're trying to accomplish.
I do, and I want to thank both you and the Chairman for allowing me the time to meet with you, and I really do applaud this committee. I think that the separation between official business and personal business is important so that the public really has trust in their government, that the press has exposure into it, and yet we can keep our private lives private, and that there's that separation. And I must say, looking back, I think at the CFTC, though the Inspector General said we didn't violate any laws, which is good, I think we could have done better. And there's 99% of these, in my case, that were here in government accounts, but what about that 1%? So we've brought it in now. We've gone back and we've looked at FOIA requests, and we see that there's not anything a problem. 3 things. I think we have to tighten our rules. NARA has done that yesterday. I want to do that at the CFTC, and if you do that through H.R. 1234, while I'm not an expert there, I do support the general approach to really modernize our record-keeping laws to the 21st century. 2, I think training is critical, and I've directed our Executive Director and General Counsel to update our training, both on onboarding employees and also the current staff. And thirdly is technology. We're going to need to spend money on this capstone approach, but I think capstone is a really good thing because it means it captures everything. Even the inadvertent deletion can't be deleted.
And last one, Ms. Jackson, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. I would echo the idea of clarity as much as possible in a very complex situation. I thank the committee for trying to give more clarity because I think every official with good intent is trying to follow the law as best they can, use their best judgment. And I would also urge that there be if there are a set of rules and policies and they're followed, that second-guessing by looking at the official records and trying to guess whether or not somebody was complying is quite difficult because those records are all public and available. So I would just ask for fairness in judgment as well, that there be a set of requirements and that people understand them, be trained on them, and then be looked to those requirements and not a moving target.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I just want to piggyback what the ranking member said, or your line of questioning. I hope everyone seeing this today understands that members of Congress, if they just put darrell.isa at house.gov, it would be useless from a standpoint of doing business. And I think Mr. Cummings and I both have that situation. I know members who tried having a plain, ordinary name. So I want to recognize that the same approach as at your agency often doesn't work for the head of an agency or even for some key people within an agency. Having said that, Ms. Jackson, one of the concerns of the committee is during the entire period before your alias was known, FOIA requests, if they were germane, did not give true name. And one of the challenges we're going to have for Mr. Ferriero and in our legislation is to make sure that if a name like IT.something or an absolute fake name, in your case the name appeared to be clearly somebody else, a man, when there's a FOIA, it has to be understood. It has to be converted to a true name. And that may be the bigger challenge is that I can be darrell.isa, you know, Mr. Cummings can be Cummings dot, or I can be Joe Bag of Donuts and you can be Sam Good Neighbor.
Thank you.
But if a document is produced, he is a good neighbor. It has to be at a true name, and that will be something the committee will be working on going forward, is the fact that true names have to somehow come out to the extent that they're not redacted. Now, to the extent that they redacted all of them, I guess it wouldn't actually matter what the email address was. And with that, we go to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Silver, what do you think the purpose of the Federal Records Act is? We'll get to the plain language in a minute. What's the purpose of it?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I assume
you don't have to be a lawyer to know the purpose of the Federal Records Act.
I think the purpose of the Federal Records Act, Congressman, is to make sure that there is as complete and robust a record of agency activities as is possible.
You would be right. Now, the last time you were with us, I asked you specifically whether or not you had deleted any emails that might fall under the jurisdiction of the Federal Records Act. Do you recall your response?
I think I said at the time that I had certainly deleted emails, but it was not in an intent to evade. It was a regular cleaning out of my inbox.
Was that testimony true at the time you gave it, and is it currently true?
Yes.
It was true at the time?
It was true at the time.
Now, I am informed that a third of your personal emails were not produced to the committee prior to your testimony. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I agree with that. As you know, Congressman, I had come back in the country 2 days before the hearing. We produced as much as we could before the hearing, and we produced everything that we hadn't yet produced until after the hearing.
Well, that's an interesting statement you just made, because are you aware that some of the emails we got from your personal email account we didn't get from you, we got from other sources?
I'm sure that's true because I had deleted some.
Well, then you would not have given us everything, and your prior testimony about not deleting anything would have also been incorrect.
No, that's not right, Congressman. I gave you everything that I had.
Mr. Silver, I want to read an email to you, and I want you to help me kind of walk through it, okay? Don't ever send an email on Department of Energy email with private email addresses. That makes them subpoenaable. Now, we're going to overlook the fact that the word subpoenaable is not a word. Why were you concerned about subpoenas?
As I said before your arrival, Congressman.
No, I was here for it.
That email was an intent to remind and admonish the staff who had received an earlier email that was on the DOE server that somebody had included somebody's personal email address on, that they should try to keep those two things separate.
Why? That's my question. What were you concerned would be subpoenaed?
I wasn't concerned that any specific thing was going to be subpoenaed.
Well, then why did you use that phraseology, Mr. Silver? That's not a throwaway line. That's not, hope you're doing well, call me sometime.
No, it is inartful, no question about it.
No, I didn't say it was inartful. I think it was exactly what you intended to communicate. My question to you is, what were you concerned would be subpoenaed?
I was not concerned that any specific thing would be subpoenaed.
Well, then why did you say it, Mr. Silver? That makes them subpoenaable.
I was trying to remind the staff that all their personal emails, and whatever that includes, whatever they do, whoever they're doing it
Well, don't you
with.
think that flies directly in the face of the Federal Records Act, that you would be concerned that something would be discovered? I mean, subpoenaable is another word for discoverable, right? They mean the same thing, essentially.
Yes.
So your DOE emails are already discoverable. You were concerned that personal emails would be discovered, right?
I was reminding the staff that their personal emails should remain personal to themselves.
Well, that's not what you said, Mr. Silver. I mean, that may have been what you meant, but that's certainly not what you said.
Well,
what you said was that makes them subpoenaable or discoverable or can be found out.
As I said, Congressman, what I meant was that they should keep their personal and professional emails separate.
I asked you specifically whether or not you were concerned that concealment might be a motive for using personal emails, because you told us it was all about convenience, that you only forwarded emails that had large attachments or documents, and that it made it difficult for you to read on your BlackBerry. Do you recall that testimony?
I do. I said that was largely the case, but yes, I do recall that.
All right. Did you forward any emails from your DOE account to your personal account that did not have documents attached to them?
I'm sure I did.
Well, the very email that you and I have been discussing came from your personal email account, right?
That email does originate from my personal account, yes.
Right, and that didn't have a lot of documents attached to it. It wasn't necessarily hard to read, was it? It's just 2 sentences.
Right. That's correct.
Ms. Jackson, can you use my home email rather than this one when you need to contact me directly? Why did you say that?
Because Allison Taylor, the author in the email chain, was a friend, and I believe that a personal friend should use personal email.
All right. Is there an exception for personal friends in the Federal Records Act?
Sir, as I've already stated, my intention was to comply with the Federal Records Act.
That wasn't my question, actually. Is there an exemption or an exception that you're aware of for personal friends? That's a simple, it's not a complicated question. Are you aware of an exception to the Federal Records Act for personal friends, yes or no?
The Federal Records Act the intent is to make sure that official government business is captured in official government accounts.
Well, what she was emailing you, would you consider that to have been official government business?
As I said earlier, sir, she had requested through official channels a meeting for her employer.
And do you think that was a personal meeting or a meeting in your professional capacity as the
The meeting was
administrator?
being handled through professional channels.
All right, so it was a
Therefore-
professional email that she sent to you, and your response was, contact me on my personal email.
No, the response included saying that we would work to set up the meeting, and what I say is if you need to contact me directly, this is a friend talking to another friend.
Is it
please
possible
call
that
me
a
on my
friend could
personal
contact
email.
you about official business? Is that possible?
It's certainly
Well, it
possible.
clearly has to be possible because that's what's happened here.
Well, I'm happy to answer the question, sir. I would say yes. It's certainly
Okay,
possible.
so why would there be an exception for friends to use your personal email, even if it might be official government work?
Sir, friends use personal email. If there's official government work involved, then under EPA policy, I would then have to forward it in to an official account so that it could be captured for record-keeping and archiving purposes.
Well, Ms. Jackson, I'm sure you can see how a skeptical reader of that email might reach another conclusion, wouldn't you?
I think that if someone has the intent to see something more there, that's fine, but the email talks about a meeting being scheduled through official channels.
Right, and she used the Richard Windsor email, and she didn't have any trouble getting to you through that email. And your response was, can you use my home email rather than this one when you need to contact me directly?
Again, if you look at the entirety of the email chain.
I don't have the
you'll see
entirety of it. I'll be happy to look at
It's available
it.
on the EPA website, and it
I'll be
has
happy
been
to.
released under FOIA. I also gave it for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, yield for a second. I just
Certainly.
want to make sure the record's clear. For Allison Taylor to contact you at your Windsor account, you had to give her your Windsor account. It wasn't public.
I actually do not know how she got the account name, the account address, sir. I do not know. I don't have those records. I don't have the Windsor email accounts available to me.
Okay. And I think Mr. Gowdy hit everything except one sub-question. You said in your testimony that you would determine when something would be forwarded. Isn't it true, under the Federal Records Act, you don't get to decide what's relevant? It is your entire database is often looked at for discovery. So in the case of your private email, you're deciding what you think, and Mr. Silver and Mr. Gensler are deciding what's relevant, rather than a neutral third party deciding whether something should be discoverable. And I think that may be a part of what Mr. Gowdy was alluding to, is that by a lobbyist contacting you outside of government chains, it becomes much more, well, I'll turn over what I think is relevant and delete the rest. And with that, we go to Mr.
Chairman,
Davis.
may I respond to that?
There wasn't a question there. There was an observation that somebody had your personal government account, and you gave a lobbyist your personal
No, sir,
account,
I
and that
did not
person was
say that.
asking for an official meeting, and that trained. You keep saying, go to your website. Your website shows that you had a lobbyist trying to do official business with EPA. You had somebody that was in the process of trying to work with your agency, and you're giving them a private email and not telling them, private, if you want to talk to me about the dinner dance, go to my personal email. No, you were telling them, here's my personal email and use it. And you were not in that train so specific on how to divide your personal life with this friend who you don't even know how she got your non-public government account. You may answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Respectfully, the email chain, if you look at the entirety, includes a request for a meeting that's gone through official channels. It's addressed to me as Lisa. I address her as Allison. She says, there's no business to be done. We think you're a rock star. I mean, it's conversational in nature. So my only intent was to simply say, hey, friend, if you want to contact me directly, here's my personal email account. The business that was done was handled through official channels, sir.
Ms. Jackson, I appreciate all that, but let's understand that the IG and your former agency have made it clear that we have lost forever and will not have your entire train of official activities. They have discovered that much of what we're asking for simply no longer exists, and that's been told to this committee. So in the case of your activities using personal accounts, we will not get full discovery. The public will not get it. The fact is, EPA has not met its responsibility for transparency. And quite frankly, ma'am, that means that you've put us at risk of lawsuits for decisions made in which people suspect that emails that have been lost would help their case rather than yours. That's a real problem, and that's the result of when people don't do their job right. And clearly, you didn't do your job right when it came to making those available. And that's also in the record, and people may look at it. Mr. Davis, I apologize for the lateness of that. Your gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ferriero, let me try and make sure that we have the facts straight on the laws that we're talking about today. I've heard accusations from the other side of the aisle saying that some of the witnesses at the table today, quote, broke the law, end of quote, because they used their personal email account for official business. Could you please answer this question, yes or no? Is it against the law for a Federal employee to use a non-government email account for official government business?
Would the gentleman yield to make sure that the accusation is correct? I'd just like you to, Mr. Davis, would you yield?
Yes.
I just wanted to add to that because I think his answer is important. Our allegation is that not that people use private email, but that in many, many cases, those private emails of doing official business were not forwarded in any time frame, at least until we were in discovery with subpoenas, to the government. That's our accusation of breaking the law. I just want to make that clear. Thank the gentleman.
Thank you very much, and I resume.
With the Chairman's clarification, the guidance that we have provided is the recognition that personal email accounts can be used, but if they're used for official business, then that communication needs to be forwarded to their government accounts.
So that it can be revealed.
Exactly.
Or accessed.
So that it can be captured just as all government records are captured.
Thank you very much. Let me ask you this. The Federal Records Act requires that agencies preserve Federal records regardless of how they are created. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Not every email an agency employee writes would even be a Federal record. Is that correct?
Say that again?
Not every email an agency employee writes would even be a Federal record.
That's possible.
Can you explain what would be considered a record?
Anything related to the business of the agency.
So if there is something of a personal nature that does not relate to the business of the agency, must that be accessible?
No.
If an employee creates an email record using a non-public account, what should the employee then do?
If they are transacting government business on that personal account, then that message needs to be forwarded to their government account so that it's captured as record.
So the Federal Records Act does not include any specific penalties for violations of the law.
That's right.
I think then that we all agree that Federal employees should avoid non-official email accounts for official business. But as NARA acknowledges in the guidance it issued yesterday, there are times when using a personal email account is necessary. NARA's guidance says, and I quote, "While agency employees should not generally use personal email accounts to conduct official agency business, there may be times when agencies authorize the use of personal email accounts, such as in emergency situations when Federal accounts are not accessible, or when an employee is initially contacted through a personal account. In these situations, agency employees must ensure that all Federal records sent or received on personal email systems are captured and managed in accordance with agency record-keeping practices. So, Mr. Ferriero, you agree that there are times when an employee may need to use a personal email account in order to perform their duties. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mica.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and came in a little late, but let me just talk to Mr. Silver, if I may, a couple of questions for Mr. Silver. You were the Executive Director of the Loan Program of the Department of Energy from, when was it, 2009 to
November of 2009 until the end of September of 2011.
And you were, I guess, in that position when the administration issued some energy loans that resulted in significant taxpayer losses, including Solyndra, Beacon Power, is it Abound Solar, and Fisker Automotive? Is that correct?
Yes and no, Congressman. I was the head of the agency
during the time.
Yes, not all of those ran into trouble during that period, but yes.
Okay. And then I see here that when you came and testified before us, Mr. Cummings, our ranking member, the July 18th hearing, 2012, said, you stated, as I say, almost nobody, and certainly nobody I'm aware of in the loan program, even knew who the individuals were who had invested either directly or indirectly in these companies. That was your statement?
Yes, I did make that statement. There seems to be some confusion about that. We obviously know who the investor groups are because we negotiate with them. That's the nature of the business. I took the question to mean, did we know anything about their donation history, and did we know the underlying investors? So, for example, in a venture capital firm, we have no idea who the limited partners in that firm are.
So you did know people like, is it Aaron Price, Ira Aaron Price?
Yes, Ira Aaron Price, yes.
You did know him before?
Certainly, he is one of the partners of one of the firms that was an investor.
Did you know at the time he was a major investor in Abound Solar and Telsa?
Did I know at the time? At what time, sir? Yes, I mean, I knew he was an investor.
At the time they received government loans?
Of course, I hadn't, but members of my staff had negotiated with he and his firm and the other investors on the terms of the transaction.
Did you communicate with him by telephone or by email?
Undoubtedly both, sir.
Okay, and private email?
I don't recall, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, and how about a John Doerr, D-O-E-R-R, an investor in Fisker?
Yes, he's a partner at Kleiner Perkins.
Yes, partner at Kleiner's. Did you communicate with him on personal email or by phone calls?
Probably both, sir.
Mm-hmm. It seems a little bit in conflict to what you told Mr. Cummings about, but did you know also that Mr. Doerr was, again, an investor in Fisker at the time?
I did, although, yes, I did. But
so do you still stand by your statement that you had given to Mr. Cummings?
Yes, sir, I do. It's a very fair question. I was responding to whether or not we knew who in the investment world, which I come from, the question about who is an investor is as a function of—
Well, he was trying to find out what kind of relationship and if you knew people that you were giving these loans to. And the question has always been about what type of communications. Yes. And it appears that communications that were personal in nature also took place with these people who had a financial stake, correct?
Yes, I do know them personally. Personal communications did take place.
Okay, so you've been with this Third Way think tank since you left?
I'm sorry, I apologize again.
Have you been with this, it's called Third Way, it's a think tank, I don't know.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Have you done any other consulting work or received any compensations from anyone else since, other than Third Way, since you left DOE?
Yes, sir. I'm on the board of several privately held companies.
Any of these firms that receive government assistance?
No, sir.
None of them?
None.
And what about your relationship to some of the individuals that I just mentioned, what about contacts post-employment with Mr. Doerr and Aaron?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
I mentioned two individuals in particular, which you had personal communications, and they also received these loans or assistance. What has been your relationship with them post your employment with DOE?
I maintain a personal relationship with them, but I have no formal professional or financial relationship with either.
Do either of them or any of the firms you're associated with contribute to this Third Way?
No, sir, not to the best of my knowledge.
To your knowledge?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our panel. Got to understand, I'm not quite sure what we're doing here today. I guess it's to try to create a breathless scandal, another one. You know, and if we really want to look into the misuse of emails and the bleeding of political and personal and professional, we really ought to be calling a number of officials from the previous administration back here, because that was pretty egregious, actually, where there was a deliberate circumvention and then destruction. Mr. Ferriero, they weren't archived, 81 of them, 81 individuals. Systematic. This isn't systematic. My colleagues seem to want to make a case study out of poor Ms. Jackson, who's guilty of the crime of trying to protect the environment of the United States, and as far as I can tell from the evidence, you know, tried her best to, among many, many other things she's dealing with, make sure she got her emails right. And when they weren't right, she corrected it. Now, I want to make sure, though, that I'm being fair to you, Ms. Jackson, because if you're this evil genius who's trying to misuse government property and, you know, eviscerate the concept of transparency for all time, we want to get that on the record. So let me make sure I'm following what happened. When you became the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, you were assigned 2 EPA Gov email addresses. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And I'm sure, given all you were facing after the economic collapse, and, you know, that was overseen by the previous administration, you were really focused like a laser beam on these 2 email addresses you were given. I mean, that you just studied them. You know, you want to make sure they were going to work. You call people in to brief you. I mean, you spent your time on that, right?
No, sir. The career staff set up the accounts as they had for previous administrators.
Oh, stop right there. So this wasn't unique to you?
No, sir. This was a practice that had become common through several administrators before.
So, for example, your predecessor in the Bush administration and your predecessor in the Clinton administration were similarly given 2 email addresses. Is that correct?
I can't confirm the Clinton administration. I don't know. But from media reports, I know that's absolutely true for the Bush administration.
Okay. So then they have to figure out a name for your account. Is that right?
Yes, sir. They asked for a name.
So why wouldn't they just say Lisa Jackson?
Well, I suggested Admin Jackson because it was easy to remember.
And what did they?
Career staff recommended not to use something easily searchable because our database was searchable, and if people could search and find it, then that would negate the advantage of having a secondary email account.
Gotcha. Someone could actually, who shouldn't have access to what you're trying to do, hack in.
Well, it just meant you would get too many emails to be able to use the account on a daily.
Well, there's that too. But also someone could easily, no homework, no problem, don't even need to get sophisticated. It's under Lisa Jackson. And they thought that was prudent not to do.
Apparently, that's what they had learned through experience.
Okay, and so the name used was Richard Windsor, is that correct?
That's correct.
And throughout your tenure, that secondary email account was used for official business and subject to the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, is that correct?
Yes, sir. I used it every day.
So it wasn't misused?
Sir, it's an EPA account. It was set up that way so that information could move into it and be captured. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. It was my practice to use it that way so that they could be captured.
Yeah.
And EPA is in the process of releasing thousands of those emails.
Well, I'm sorry, Ms. Jackson, that some people are just your convenient target to demonize another official from this administration and try to make something bigger than it is. But, Mr. Gensler, in CF2C, I'm reading your testimony, and you said, I've directed the Executive Director and the General Counsel to enhance the agency's training on the Federal Records Act and transparency in government, and to promote further an environment that supports telework and flexible schedules. I was intrigued by that. I'm a big champion of telework, so I'm glad you're going to promote that. But obviously, emails matter a lot if you're going to be doing that. Could you just expand a little bit on that in terms of, doesn't that pose some challenges too, not just technological, but security?
It does. I think the—
And if you'll speak close to the mic so we can hear you. Thank you.
I think as I've come to learn more about this, I think there's three related issues. Transparency laws like the Federal Record Act and FOIA, which really are about enhancing the public's awareness and trust in government. Information security, for sure, because we don't want breaches. And then thirdly, just the technology itself. And I'm not a technology expert, but I would say when I came to the agency, we did not have a robust training mechanism either on the Federal Records Act or on technology. I'm the chairman of the agency, and I take full responsibility. And I do think we can and need to do better. And so that's why I've directed the appropriate senior people at our agency, let's go back and make sure that when we bring people onto the agency in their first week, not months later, not even years later, but they really get robust training about everything that David Ferriero wants us to get. But also that we promote telework in a way that there's efficient means to see that email or other documents through various access devices when you're at home, but access devices that comply with Federal Records Act. So it's doing both.
Yeah.
And when this third sort of prong is information security.
Mr. Chairman, would you allow me an extra minute, because we went 6 minutes over time. I thank the Chair. You've always been fair. Mr. Ferriero and Mr. McClaflin, to this point, I'd like you to just address, because, all right, put aside whether somebody systematically, deliberately circumvents the law. That's a fair concern if it's occurring. My sense is that overwhelmingly what goes on here is we're trying to adjust to the technology. We're trying to meet multiple goals, compliance with this law, compliance with that law, promoting telework, which is also the law, I might add, to say nothing of the core mission, by the way, not incidental. And so, you know what? Sometimes we slip up. Sometimes on my official account, my daughter sends me a picture that has nothing to do with my business. Now, sometimes I have multiple accounts. I got Facebook, I got Twitter, I got to remember which is political and which is official and which is personal, and and I'm busy. And sometimes with the best of intention, I might slip. Could you talk about that a little bit in terms of both the technological challenge of that, Mr. McClaflin, and Mr. Ferriero, the issue of compliance? Because we do need to be fair to people in terms of technology sometimes poses a challenge and human beings make mistakes versus this pernicious, insidious desire to circumvent the law because there's something awful going on and we're going to get to the bottom of it.
So the common theme for me as the archivist in listening has to do with exactly what this new directive is addressing, and that is the need for getting serious in the Federal Government about compliance with the Federal Records Act, the need for training, the need for adequate technology, the responsibility of a senior agency official to take responsibility in the agency, better certification of records managers, creating the records manager job description in the Federal Government, which doesn't exist now. This is the development of a new culture around records that involves the Inspector General, legal counsel, the CIO, the entire agency in helping make the transition to electronic records much more robust. And as the Chairman said when he opened this hearing, to make it possible for Americans to know what's going on. That's the purpose of the keeping of the records.
Mr. Connolly, it's a huge conundrum. And actually what this debate sort of strikes me as is yet another example where I suspect we will catch up with email practices and policies and the technologies for capturing them right at the moment that everything is shifting over to new proprietary platforms, new messaging services, what's called over-the-top. So for example, you may be used to doing SMS text messaging on your phone. If you were in your 20s, you would be doing something which looks and feels the same, but is actually an app on your smartphone that's using a completely parallel system where the traditional governmental techniques for capturing that text message don't even exist. So I actually think, and if I could maybe add a fourth idea to the three that I laid out in my prepared testimony just from listening, one thing that is clear is that as the technologies evolve rapidly, agency practices have to keep up. They will not keep up technologically, but the human practices of training, periodic reminders, and if I were to add a fourth idea to my list, it would be a departure checklist, so that as you are leaving the agency, you get a checklist where you go through with counsel or with somebody from the relevant records management official in the agency, and you go through your private accounts and you do some of the obvious things that you should do. In my case, this happened when a FOIA request came in. And I sat down with a lawyer and we went through my personal account. We typed in the searches. We got those emails, most of which had been captured and forwarded over, but some of which hadn't. Think about like a poster child for a typical mid-level official who tries to be conscientious and misses some things. That's what happens. So a regular administrative practice can make up for a lot of the technological gap that's going to continue to exist.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much.
I thank the gentleman, and no one argues that there's going to be inadvertent use of some personal accounts, I think, but what we're talking about here is thousands of pages of email, in the case of Mr. Silver, thousands of pages of emails, which, frankly, the last time we had Mr. Silver in front of the committee, we didn't have all those. We now do. And so I want to go back to where Mr. Silver was starting with you. I want to go back to where some of my colleagues were earlier, specifically an exchange you had with Representative Gowdy, where Mr. Gowdy said convenience may be an explanation for why people enter things on their personal account instead of their work account. Would you also agree that concealment may be a motive for folks who want to use their personal account and not their official account? Your response from the transcript, well, it certainly was not my motive, sir. Pretty strong and emphatic language. And then yet we have this email that I think the Chairman has already cited that we can probably put on the screen, where you're communicating with a Mr. Wright, Morgan Wright, and you say, don't ever send an email on the Department of Energy email with private addresses. That makes them subject to subpoena. So I just want to ask you, I think the obvious question, the conclusion many would reach is, looks like you weren't being square with Mr. Gowdy when you answered his question back on July 18, 2012.
Congressman, all I can say again is that I was not trying to evade anything, and that the email that you have put up here was a reminder, an admonition to a small group of staff.
So why not send that admonition back on your government account? Why send it on your personal account?
Yeah, to be candid, I don't know what happened. I don't remember where I was.
I'll tell you what I think happened. I think you were trying to conceal it. And let's go to the next email. And the reason I think you were trying to conceal it is because you were, we talked about this the last time you were with us. I wish I would have had this subpoena, or excuse me, this email the last time we got together. But I think you were trying to help your friends. We got an email from Mr. Woolard, CEO of BrightSource. BrightSource got money from the 1705 Loan Guarantee Program. Isn't that correct, Mr. Silver?
Yes, they did.
Yes. And here on this email, you're talking about Mr. Woolard, CEO of an organization, asking to get taxpayer money, you invite him to stay at your house. Guest bedroom is ready. If we go to the next email, we talked about this last time you were with us too, Mr. Silver. You actually, this is an email exchange between you and Mr. Woolard where they ask, and again, they're asking to get taxpayer money, and they ask you to write a letter that's going to go to the White House Chief of Staff. Pretty important person. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Silver? Yes. White House Chief of Staff, pretty important. They ask you to edit the letter that John Bryson, who would later become Secretary of Commerce, who is the chairman of the board of BrightSource, they ask you to edit a letter that you're going to send to the White House Chief of Staff. So it seems to me, you know, just in common sense would say, you're concealing things using private email accounts because you're trying to help your buddies get taxpayer money. And in fact, you're doing it so much, you're so focused on helping your friends get money in this program, you're editing the letters that they're going to send to the White House. Now, that's unbelievable. Don't you think taxpayers would maybe say, wait a minute, something doesn't quite look kosher here?
Congressman, as I said the last time you and I had this conversation.
You did edit that letter, right?
I did edit that letter.
That letter went to Bill Daley, White House Chief of Staff, right?
Wrong.
All right, but you edited it. It was supposed to go to Bill Daley. And you say in there, we want the White House to quarterback this loan closure between management and budget and Department of Energy, right?
Congressman, if you read
what it says, I mean, you wrote it.
If you read the first two sentences of that email, you will see that I say I don't think this is a particularly good idea. But the point I made to you before.
But you're making my point because John Woolard was your friend, the same guy you invited to stay at your house. You were willing to do it, even though you didn't think it was a good idea.
The loan had already been conditionally approved. It had been approved by the career staff at the Department of Energy. It had been approved by the career staff.
Mr. Silver, I think you're missing the point. I think you're missing the point.
No, so my.
No.
Sorry.
Mr. Gowdy asked you a specific question. We didn't have this email. We got it 2 days after the hearing was over, conveniently for you. We didn't have that email, so you could answer Mr. Gowdy and say, concealment wasn't part of my motive, even though we got an email where you send on your private email account telling people, don't ever give this Department of Energy addresses on email. Might be subject to subpoena. And we have you helping your friends here. I mean, that's what the record clearly shows. I think anyone with common sense could make that conclusion. And to add insult to injury, this is the part we forget. I mean, this is the part we forget. The taxpayers not only had it concealed from them, their representative, Mr. Gowdy, was not only lied to, the program had 22 of the 26 companies that got money had a credit rating of BB-. 6 of them have went bankrupt. Taxpayers have lost millions of dollars. The taxpayer got the shaft all the way around in this program. Your friends got helped. You weren't square with Congress. Finally, we have, and I think the chairman brought this up. Finally, we have your lobbyists. Let's put that one up too. This, to me, adds insult to injury. Finally, we have your lobbyists saying to the committee just a couple days ago, don't direct any questions to Mr. Silver. Now, this is unbelievable. I mean, you can mislead a member of Congress when he's asking you questions. You can help your friends. You can lose billions of dollars of taxpayer money and still have the gall for your lobbyists to ask members of Congress not to ask you any questions. Now, tell me how that, I mean, do you think the taxpayers might take offense to that whole scenario, that whole story, that whole narrative, which is absolutely proven by the facts in front of us?
I think, Congressman, that that's a wholesale mischaracterization of what happened.
Wait, did you not send that email that says, don't do this, it could be subject to subpoena? Did you send that email?
I did send that email.
Did you edit a letter from the CEO of BrightSource from the email where the CEO of BrightSource asked you to edit a letter from the chairman of the board of BrightSource going to the White House Chief of Staff? Is that true?
Only after they had already received the condition.
You edited that letter, right?
I did.
Okay. And is it not true that you also, your lobbyists, ask us not to ask you questions?
I know nothing about that, sir.
Well, is this individual your lobbyist?
It was brought up perhaps before.
No, that's a yes or no. Is she your lobbyist?
No, I don't have a lobbyist, sir. I don't know anything about this topic.
Mr. Chairman, yield.
Be happy to yield.
This is only, I think, first of all, there's nothing wrong with your line of questioning, but the chairman and I, Chairman Issa and I agreed I thought that we would look into that particular issue.
Okay.
Because it's an attorney-client situation. But he and I expressed concern. I don't know whether you were here, and that we would look into it jointly off the record.
Appreciate it. Finally, and isn't it true that Solyndra, Beacon Power, Abound Solar, VPG, and Fisker have all filed for bankruptcy and all received taxpayer money?
Yes, which brings the total loss to 3% of the portfolio.
Which is millions and millions of dollars, right?
And a fraction of what Congress assumed when they appropriated funds for the program.
I mean, what's your point? Taxpayers lost money.
My point is that not every investment will be successful, but the vast majority have been.
And so the fact that taxpayers lost money, that's a success story?
The program is a success.
22 out of 26 companies had a BB- credit rating. No one in the private sector was going to loan them. You guys go ahead and do it. 6 of them go bankrupt, and that's a success?
The BB-, sir, is a function of a speculative rating by a ratings agency.
Well, it looks like you probably should have paid a little more attention to it, at least for the 6 that went bankrupt.
The ratings are included in the analysis that is undertaken by the professional career
Mr.
staff.
Silver, you lied to Mr. Gowdy. You helped your friends. Taxpayers lost a bunch of money, and your lobbyists had the gall to say, members, don't ask him questions. That's what took place.
I did not lie to Mr. Gowdy at all, sir.
So it's not, well, and I'll finish here. So it's not concealment when you tell someone, don't do this, it could be subject to subpoena. That's not concealment?
It is not the way I intended it. I intended it.
No, but it's, the common taxpayer who paid for these programs, for the 6 companies that lost millions of dollars, that went bankrupt, the taxpayer might think different. The taxpayer might say, you know what, that sure looks and sounds like concealment to me.
I think it was inartfully written, and I can understand that there's a different interpretation, but it is not what I meant, sir. That's all I can tell you.
All right. Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from, is it Michigan or Arizona who's in line next? Mr. Gosar, the gentleman from Arizona. I stand corrected. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The Washington Post reported that over the past 12 years, John C. Beal was often away from his job as a high-level staffer at the Environmental Protection Agency. He cultivated an air of mystery and explained his lengthy absences by telling his bosses that he was doing top-secret work, including for the CIA in some capacity. For years, apparently, no one checked. Now Beal is charged with stealing nearly $900,000 from the EPA, actually from the taxpayers, by receiving pay and bonuses he did not deserve. My question is for Lisa Jackson. Did your aliases, Richard Windsor, win a Scholar of Ethical Behavior Award or any other award or certificate from the EPA?
When I used my secondary official EPA account to take training.
As Richard Windsor.
It was windsor.richard@epa.gov.
Okay, so you did win.
No, I didn't answer your question yet. When I used that account to take any type of training, which I thought was an important thing for me to do as leader of the agency, the end of the training certifies completion of training in the name on the account. So I am not the administrator of the EPA anymore. I am a private citizen, sir. You can direct your question to EPA as to what was awarded, but what I can say is that I completed the training that I was supposed to.
And you received a certificate?
I did not.
Well, Mr. Windsor, or, well, I'm really confused.
Sir, we've already gone over that. And the use of a secondary name was common practice, is common practice. The archivist has already said that there's nothing wrong with having additional official accounts, and that those accounts need to be named. Now, you can quibble with the name if you like, but what I did was to do government business on a government account.
Mr. Beal, apparently you must have done the same thing. You know, we're still trying to figure out.
Sir, if you have questions about Mr. Beal, I suggest you direct them to the agency.
During the training that won your alias, Richard Windsor, award or certificate from the EP, did any part of the training remind you that using an alias for official business was prohibited?
No, sir. In fact, the archivist earlier stated that one may have secondary or multiple official government accounts. I had a secondary official government account like my predecessors before me, and that was done for time management and to be able to do my job.
In light of the story, I really have to ask, did Richard Windsor receive any kind of pay from the EPA on top of the salary you already received as Lisa Jackson?
I don't even understand your question, sir.
Okay. Have you, well, let me ask you another question. At any time during your service with the EPA, did you receive a bonus?
I don't believe that.
Did you ever receive any pay whatsoever as Richard Windsor or, well, Richard?
Sir, first off, I worked for the EPA for 15 years. I received bonuses as a career employee. May I assume you're asking about my time as EPA administrator?
Yes.
When I was EPA administrator, I received no salary increase or bonus.
Okay. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. No, I guess it's me next. Mr. McClaflin, I think you brought some interesting ideas to the table. In private sector, I'm a healthcare professional, particularly with patients. We're very, very, very careful. So we have pre-checklists when we have patients or people that are going to deal with patients' information. So I like your idea of a post-checklist, but you also have to have a pre-checklist to orient that. And so I think where I'm going with this question is I want to see some rectification, and I'm not happy with what I hear. Mr. Gensler, when you look at the process, did you feel like it was right?
I think, Mr. Chairman, that we can and need to do better. I look at this. Our training was not robust at the agency. I'm the head of the agency. I take full responsibility. I think we have to have better training. But I also think we need to tighten and enhance our policies because, as the archivist laid out just yesterday, for the first time in writing, directly speaking to personal email, we need to narrow the use of it and when it's used to get that into Federal records. Fortunately, in my case, 99% was already in a government system somewhere, but it still left that 1%. And so I do think that I've learned a lot in these last 3 or 4 months looking at this, that we need to do better, and I applaud this committee's efforts with regard to the House bill that you're trying to move forward on this.
So I'm a very big person on personal accountability, personal responsibility. Leadership in my office stopped with me, whether it was my hygienist, whether it be my dental assistant or my receptionist. Anything went wrong, it was accountable to me. It seems to me that we need some type of a third party, would you not agree, for oversight, and that's got a little bit more jurisdiction than just an Inspector General?
Well,
I'm alluding maybe to the Department of Justice.
Well, I know our laws are vigorous. I'm not familiar enough with the Federal Records Law to how it should be amended. But our Inspector General raised this, looked at it specifically for Congress, said that there was no laws that were violated.
Mr. Ferriero, would you agree that we need to have some different type of teeth in here? Because, this is my second term of Congress, and I have no ability as a member of Congress to actually get records in many cases, whether it be from previous administrations or this administration's. It's part of my constitutional duty. Do you not think that we also had to have the Department of Justice being involved in some type of oversight of these records?
I think that part of this education process for each agencies and reminding the Inspector Generals, which I have done personally at their annual meeting, my Chief Records Officer has done, that they have a role to play too, is not something that has been followed through to its greatest extent.
Is there any other things that you can see for expedience of the records? Because, we draw this out in court proceedings. Do you have some other ideas in regards to how we would approach this so that we actually have a speedier release of documentation?
Well, I think that the capstone system which we have instituted, trialed in the National Archives over the past several months, and attached to my testimony are kind of the outline of that process, goes a long way to address some of the problems that you've heard this morning.
Gotcha. Ms. Jackson, did it feel like it was wrong, the practice? I mean, I got this feeling from listening to some of the, from both sides here. that your comment was based, well, previous administrations had done it. That's not an excuse. Did it feel like it was wrong?
No, sir. I feel as though I did everything I could to comply with the law and the policy as it was explained and as I understood it.
Did you even question the practice? I mean, when it was first proposed to you?
As I mentioned, I questioned why can't I just have a name, Admin Jackson, on the account, but I did not question the secondary email account because it was practice. And as we've heard, it was used commonly and is recognized by the archivist as being an okay practice, as long as judgment is used to ensure that if anything is in the personal account, that it is forwarded in for record-keeping purposes.
Yeah, I mean, but it leaves a lot for the individual, and I mean, you're forthright in regards to, acknowledgement of that. But I mean, we're subject to human display, and that there's always that question in human display.
Absolutely, sir. I agree that there is an exercise of judgment implicit in what the archivist is describing. That's exactly what I did to the best of my ability. That's what I work to do every day. And so if there are changing requirements, I think training is a wonderful opportunity because as requirements change, I think there needs to be a constant awareness of that.
So do you actually believe that there also ought to be some accountability? I mean, the mistakes are made. I mean, in private sector, when I make a mistake, I'm liable for it. I mean, we got to have some of that accountability here on the Federal level, too.
That's exactly why I'm here, sir, because I wanted to be here to explain the steps I took to ensure that my records were managed appropriately.
Do you agree with everything that Mr. Ferriero has put forward as in regards to oversight, or is there anything else you would like to add?
I would simply like to add that, it is I came here today because I wanted to be able to explain what I did and why I did it. And I believe very strongly that the use of my email accounts was in order to be consistent with the requirements, which appear to be changing. So I don't envy him that job or, sir, frankly, you that job, because this is a very complex issue.
Would you agree with that, Mr. Silver?
Yes, sir, I would. I'm certainly no expert, but everything I heard made sense to me. In my particular situation, I clearly would have benefited from additional guidance and training. There's no question about that.
Do you actually see why we're even making comments? I mean, because it looks like interested discussions on should be an impartial type of jurisdiction.
Yes, I'm agreeing with you.
Okay. Do you see anything that you would propose as looking in hindsight that you would actually want to forward?
I'm not terribly qualified to offer up the kinds of advice that Mr. McClaflin did, but I would say that there is clearly a challenge with how to handle relationships you've had for many, many years prior to coming into these offices. There could be some additional clarification and guidance around that.
And what about penalties?
I'm unqualified to comment on that, sir.
Why not?
I don't know what they should. I defer to the.
Aren't you a steward of the Federal taxpayer?
Well, not currently, but in my job, yes, I was.
And I think that's the ultimate accountability, don't you believe?
I completely agree with you.
Okay. Mr. McClaflin, do you have anything you would like to offer?
All I would do is just reiterate my earlier point that the world of technology is changing very fast. Anybody entering Federal service right now is going to have a greater number of channels and accounts that people can reach them on. And so the best ideas that I've been able to come up with are a pre-checklist, better training, a post-checklist when you're leaving so that you go through and make sure you've cleared out everything that should have been moved in. I've commended the committee for the 2 clarifications in H.R. 1233, which would specify where you have to forward things and 5 days in which to do it. But I still think, for the reasons that I've laid out in my prepared testimony, that that's going to quickly actually be outdated and inadequate to the task. So anyway, I've suggested some other ideas, form language for any of your personal accounts that should go out in an autoresponder and a public profile so that you're instructing people how to steer things into your official accounts, making it easier for people to communicate with Federal employees, even when you want to keep the email addresses themselves hidden. I think all of these things would help, but ultimately what you're depending on is for people to exercise good judgment. And I don't think you can remind them often enough of their responsibilities in order to reinforce what I think is the general goodwill and intent of Federal employees across the board.
And it always starts from the top within an agency, does it not?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Cummings?
I'm finished. Thank you very much. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. I've got to get to another hearing. Thank you.
Without that, I would dismiss this committee. Adjourned.
Sorry, let's get that out of your way. Travel meetings, to be here for that constructive contribution. So you actually got capstone off the ground? Nice. That is